Welcome to this webinar about cash forecasting. My goal is to provide $15,000 or more worth of advice in 15 minutes or less of elapsed time. I hope to entertain you and educate you while doing so. The entertainment part is to think about cash balances as being like water levels. To stay afloat, you need to plan properly and look far enough ahead at where you are heading and how you are going to get there to avoid running aground or sinking. Stormy conditions can also play a factor, as can both visible and submerged rocks. When water levels are high and visibility is good, you may be able to go faster and more directly to your desired destination. If water levels are low or visibility is poor, you may need to slow down to gain extra time to react and navigate around rocks to avoid sinking. That said, stormy weather and rocks may not be the only issues you may face. On a bright sunny day, severe dehydration of the crew and running out of fuel could cause problems too. Having entertained you with a photo of my family's whitewater rafting trip, yes, I'm the guy at the front you can't see because of all the water, I want to turn to the education agenda. In terms of the agenda, we're going to discuss why we want to implement cash forecasting, why is that important, what are the objectives in doing so, how do you get started, how do you keep it simple and effective, how do you keep the cash receipts realistic, the cash payments realistic, and how do you update and review a forecast. Then we will end with a summary of the key takeaways. As an introductory comment before we get started on why it's important, please note the disclaimer that the lawyers asked for. Thank you. So why is cash forecasting important? Have you ever heard the expression cash is king? There's a lot of truth to that, especially in difficult environments. If you have cash, then it's a lot easier to survive than if you don't have cash. And with cash, looking ahead to see how much you expect to have is far more important than looking back to see how much you used to have. You need to have time to react and to take action. Action to stay afloat, to avoid payment rocks if you don't have enough cash to cover all the anticipated outflows. And if you need help from lenders or banks, it's best to arrange those credit facilities before they are needed. You don't want to have a panic stations drill the day you find you haven't got enough cash in the bank and it's run out today. You need to look far ahead so there's plenty of time to engage in discussions with people who can help you. And many lenders today are requiring 90-day plans as a first step before they will engage in any discussion. So the bottom line is you've got to look ahead to create time, to be able to react, to take action, to avoid issues. That's why cash forecasting is important. So what are the objectives of forecasting cash? First of all, you want to know in advance if there is going to be a cash shortfall or how low the cash balance would get in any time in the forecast period. You want to understand that as far ahead as possible, and if there is a shortfall or a low balance expected, you want to understand how much extra cash might be needed for safety's sake or to get rid of a negative balance, and for how long. Is it a one-time spike down, or is it something that extends for the whole forecast period? The ways of dealing with those two different situations are very different. If it's a spike down, you could maybe accelerate some cash receipts or defer some cash payments for the short period of time needed to smooth the available cash out. If it's a continual shortfall, then that's much more difficult, and you'll need to raise the water level by bringing in either bringing cash forward permanently by accelerating cash receipts continually, or by obtaining a loan from a bank or extra equity. But in any event, you want to be able to take action to improve the cash balance while there's still time to do so. Time in this situation is a perishable commodity. If you let it perish and you don't have it, then you're going to end up with a last minute surprise, which is not good news. It doesn't matter if it's a good surprise in terms of having lots of extra customers wanting lots of extra items from you that's going to generate lots of extra revenue, or if it's a bad surprise in terms of no customers buying anything. Either way, the extra stress is an issue, and particularly in the current environment, your bank or lender will not have time to react, and you could have trouble that you could easily have avoided just by looking far enough ahead to give yourself time to take action to avoid the issues. Turning now to how to start. My recommendation is to start as many private equity firms and lenders do by having their portfolio companies or customers show 13 weeks forward, with each week separate, and then refresh or update that forecast weekly. If you're concerned about cash, that makes it even more critical to fast track your draft framework and plan a very rapid implementation. Time is precious, and while you need to discuss your draft format and the process and the implementation with the affected staff, it's critical to finalize that format and process and prepare that initial forecast as quickly as possible and get into the weekly refresh schedule. So how to keep it simple and effective? Have one input page for each bank account or business unit, whatever the lowest level of granularity is you need to get to manage cash, and make sure those typically spreadsheets are all exactly the same, locked down with the same lines and columns, including a column for each week, and then you can copy those individual spreadsheets into a summary file and rapidly consolidate using 3D formulas. If you have corporate performance management software and get it into action fast enough, you could use that, but regardless, you need to be acting quickly. When you're doing the forecasting, plan all payments for the last day of the week. So make your check runs be on a Friday and get your vendors used to check runs being on a Friday and not any other day of the week. If someone has to have a particular payment earlier, make sure you forecast it for the week before because you need the end of the week to be the lowest cash point. You're going to have to increase accuracy and the amount of review and iteration you do as your cash constraints get worse. As you have less cash, it becomes more important to get the forecast accurate and to then constantly review and iterate it. Regardless of the amount of iteration you're doing, you need to make sure there is one final agreed version that is fed back to the local teams after it's been approved by the corporate office. And that way the local team will be managing the same version the corporate office is working with. Because otherwise you may find that one location is spending money that corporate planned to spend somewhere else in the business. And if it's spent, it's gone and it won't be there. So it's important to keep everybody on the same page. Turning to how to keep cash receipts realistic. Do not assume the past is necessarily a good predictor of the future, particularly if the environment has changed. For example, with COVID-19, manufacturers of masks are seeing huge demand, whereas restaurant chains are seeing a huge drop in demand. Because of that, it's important to involve those closest to the customers and use conservative forecasts. Particularly in the earlier weeks, you need to be granular because you have less reaction time. And then the longer term weeks, you would expect to improve the longer term accuracy over time, and you have more time to react if that changes. You want to encourage your relevant staff to be appropriately squeaky wheels with customers and potential funding sources to ensure they get attention and they get whatever limited cash resources those sources and customers have. At the same time, particularly where you're finding that you don't have enough cash, you'll want to proactively investigate and seek to accelerate any viable one-time items, whether that's bank line of credit draws or government programs or insurance payments, etc. And you'll need time to investigate those, and you'll need time potentially to accelerate them. You'll also need to look at the requirements, the criteria, the representations and warranties you have to give on the bank line of credit draws, or the application forms you have to get filled out and approved, etc. on the government programs and the claims approved for the insurance. That all takes time. So it's important to get going on that as soon as you think you might need it. In fact, even before that. Turning now to how to keep cash payments realistic. You'll want to consider fixed versus variable costs and make sure you adjust the variable costs in the forecast for any large volume changes, whether that's increased volumes or reduced volumes. You'll also want to stop any unnecessary payments. Minimize the cash leakage. Additionally, request moratoriums, deferrals, or extended terms from whoever you can possibly get that from, whether it's landlords, banks, vendors, reducing payroll, etc., furloughs. You'll need to look at everything that's out there to see how you can reduce cash so that you have options if you don't have enough cash receipts to pay all the bills that you would like to pay. Because of that, you'll also want to use your 13-week forecast to initiate lender discussions about relief. The sooner you can get started on big rocks being removed, like term loan principal payments or even interest payments, the better. Because once you've spent cash, it doesn't come back, and you may need that cash to do something else with, like pay payroll. So it's important to think of everything on the front end and start requesting the deferrals and the moratoriums and the extensions on terms for everything as soon as possible. Turning now to how to update and review a forecast. You'll want to compare the most recent week's forecast against the actual cash flows for that week, line by line, cash receipts and cash payments. And then you'll want to update your new forecast to take account of any delay or acceleration that either is a delay into the future or an acceleration out of the future into the past. Either way, you don't want it to be showing up in two places at the same time when it's only one item. You'll also want to refresh with the latest information. You'll want to seek opportunities to improve. You'll want to try and accelerate cash receipts and delay cash payments, particularly on big items. And you'll want to focus on the low points. Where's the lowest cash balance or a negative cash balance? And then keep iterating to stay cash positive. You'll need to look to negotiate and renegotiate and plan the actions needed to make sure that you're continually cash positive and you have as much cash as possible at every weekend. You'll then want to, as a sanity check, a reasonableness test, compare the previous forecast weekly cash balances to the new forecast for that same week. And then you'll want to understand any overall or any major week-to-week differences to make sure that they make sense and are valid, reasonable differences and not a simple error in the forecast. Turning now to a summary of key takeaways. And for those of you who are paying attention to the why cash forecasting is important slide, you'll notice that the points on here are the same. Cash is king, especially in difficult environments. Looking ahead is more important than looking back, especially with cash. As I said before, you want to know how much cash you're going to have, not how much cash you used to have. You also need to have time to react and to take action to stay afloat. And time is perishable, so it is critical that you don't lose time unnecessarily and you focus on dealing with the big issues as quickly as possible, as far ahead as possible, so you have as much time as possible to react and to take action to stay afloat. And as I mentioned before, it's best to arrange credit facilities before they're needed. You don't want to have a mad panic stations fire drill because you suddenly run out of cash and weren't expecting it. And many lenders are actually requiring 90-day plans as a first step before they will engage in discussions. So that's the summary of the key takeaways. Turning now to questions, you're welcome to send an email to cfoadvisoryservices@gmail.com, or you can reach out on LinkedIn. And I do have a number of articles about cash forecasting on LinkedIn if you'd like to look at those. Additionally, if you want to send me an invitation to link in with you, please do mention this webinar so I have the context for your request. Thank you. Looking now at the 13 rolling weeks cash forecast sample report, you can see that we have columns to compare the prior forecast with its actual result for the week 0, followed by 13 weeks forward of forecasts. Looking at the line items, there are opening cash balances, followed by cash receipts as a category, individual line items with a subtotal, cash payments as a category, again, individual line items with a subtotal, and then a net receipts or payments number. And that's an important review point because you want to see which week or weeks you have more going out than you have coming in, and vice versa. It's important to try and get your cash receipts in before you need to make the cash payments, and you may need to smooth, delay some payments, accelerate some receipts if the numbers are around the wrong way from that perspective. Regardless, you then wind up with an ending cash balance, and hopefully it is a positive cash balance. If it's not, you're going to have to do some iteration and smooth it so you get it positive. You then do a comparison point with last week's forecast, so you can see whether things are getting better or worse on a cumulative balance as you look forward over the forecast period. There's then a check total for affiliate and transfer activity. That should net to 0 because you want intercompany payments from one company in the group to be equaling intercompany receipts by other companies in the group. If it's not, you've got an error somewhere and you'll need to make sure the business units have coordinated with each other as to who's paying what when to make sure the affiliate and transfer activity does indeed net to 0. There's then room for the individual units to put in their minimum ending cash balance they feel that they need to have in their account from a safety point of view. And then we look at the net cash balances net of that desired minimum. There's also room for a forecast availability on your lines of credit, so forecast available liquidity line, which gives you then a net number. And you want to be looking at that because that has all the safety margins and the different bank accounts and different units, and it also has the available liquidity. You'll need to be confident that you can actually draw on that liquidity in order to be able to put it on the page. If it's asset based and you don't have enough assets, then it shouldn't be shown. The final slide is the 13 rolling weeks cash forecast design and intent notes. You'll see notes that reference back to the prior slide and color coding that references back to the prior slide. And this is intended to help you as you put together your own 13-week cash forecast. And that concludes the webinar. Thank you very much for listening, and I trust that you've got more than $15,000 of value in under 15 minutes. Thank you.